minstrelsy, in which mostly white performers would paint their skin black to imitate African American dancers.
The minstrel shows become popular because in order for a white person to dance like that, they paint themselves black by exaggerating what a black person did in dance form. And they would make money off of other people. And then they couldn't find good white tap dancers, so they would get black people and paint them in blackface to go over to do the show and leave. Then when you're really good, they said, you need to be on stage. And that's when you either go medicine shows, carnival shows, or vaudeville.
Tap has seen over a century's worth of transformations, each bringing its own unique style. Like that of Bill Bojangles Robinson and his famous Astaire dance in the Vaudeville era, the trailblazing Nicholas brothers, who fused jazz, ballet, and acrobatics during the Harlem Renaissance, and silver screen giants like Gene Kelly, who brought tap to 40s and 50s Hollywood.
From his earliest years, Fred Astaire was in awe of the genius, his words, of the African-American dancers he saw in vaudeville and later on Broadway. He watched them with fascination from the wings and asked them to teach him steps between shows in the alleys outside the theaters. Such dancers included Bill Bojangles Robinson, whom Astaire met around 1915-1916, when he was still a teenager. The Astaires and Robinson appeared on the same bill, and Astaire treasured the encouragement of the older dancer. Astaire proudly recounted in his autobiography that Robinson had told him admiringly, "Boy, you can dance." Later in his career, Astaire would pay tribute to the dancer in Bojangles of Harlem, Swing Time, 1936. Astaire's and Gershwin's careers took off within this context and in response to the flowering of the genius of tap dance on Broadway as well as in Harlem. 3 years before Lady Be Good, African-American dancers, who had been largely confined to performing in clubs in Harlem and off-Broadway, invaded the Great White Way with an all-black musical that thrilled Astaire's generation and led to a series of African-American shows and their imitators. Their impact would be definitive, changing the face of American musical theater and dance in musical theater forever. Shuffle Along by Eubie Blake and Noble Sissle introduced the great dancers Florence Mills and, on tour, Josephine Baker, among others. Runnin' Wild and other black musicals followed, including Lou Leslie's Blackbirds, 1928, featuring Robinson who, at age 50, at long last became a star in a wider world. Already influenced by Robinson, Astaire joined the tap revolution while it was happening and in doing so contributed to it. During the 1920s, Fred and Adele were regularly going to learn steps from black dancers and choreographers such as Buddy Bradley. But for Astaire, the most exciting new development was a refinement of tap technique practiced most famously by John W. Sublette, whose stage name was John W. Bubbles, whom Astaire cited in a 1931 interview as the dancer he most liked to watch. Bubbles was one of the originators and the most masterful developer of what came to be called rhythm tap. Astaire encountered Bubbles at the Hoofers Club in Harlem, where dancers came to learn from and challenge one another. Armstrong at Small's Paradise in 1925-1926, where Armstrong was inventing musical scat with Butter and Eggman. Bubbles began to expand the basic structure within which dancers improvised. He changed from 2 to a bar to 4 to a bar, cutting the tempo in half and giving himself twice as much time to add new inventions. As the dancer Ani Coles explains about Bubbles' technique, with 2s you just have time to do the traditional steps with as much skill as possible. With 4s, a good dancer works just as fast, even though the tempo is slower, but he has to fill in with his own ideas as well as watch his balance. In fact, he has to learn to handle his entire body more gracefully. When he started dropping his heels, he could get an extra thud whenever he wanted it. Bubbles began accenting off beats with the heels and toes in a variety of cramp rolls, which made for greater dynamics. He did new things with his toes, too, adding taps behind and bringing them together for an extra accent in front. At the same time, he worked out turns and combinations, or rhythmic patterns, some of which extended beyond the usual 8 bars. Bubbles and others also upped the ante by adding metal taps to their shoes, which, depending upon how they were used, could both increase and vary the volume of the dancers drumming on the floor. Astaire adopted this innovation, and by 1931 he was being regularly consulted by other dancers on how to place and use taps. Astaire and the integration of music and dance. The tight interlacing of sight and sound that Bubbles accomplished with his feet was to become a hallmark of Astaire's style. But Astaire did not just concentrate on the feet. He expanded his focus to the entire body, each part interplaying with the music, not only its rhythm, but the melodic line, counter melodies, and texture and color of the orchestrations. He gives, through feet and legs, hands and arms, head and torso, the physical actuality of the music. Warp and woof, wrote one critic who tried to capture Astaire's intricate choreographic attentiveness to music's inner workings. Like his African-American colleagues, Astaire did not just mimic the physical actuality of the music but interacted with it. A gesture of the arms, hands, or legs, for example, could visually punctuate or counterpoint a rhythmic phrase. Like the African-American dancers he admired, and like Gershwin, Astaire would put intricate rhythms into his dances and use both call and response and challenge devices in many of his dances, from Roberta to Top Hat, Follow the Fleet, and many more. Compare Bubbles and Astaire doing rhythm tap, and in an example of call and response, note how Astaire dances forward, call, as Rogers begins to respond. When he worked with professional tap dancers, he could really pull out all the stops. His extraordinary tap challenge with Eleanor Powell in Broadway Melody of 1940, in which each takes turns calling and responding with their foot sounds, is a highlight, and so is his dance, The Babbitt and the Bromide, with Gene Kelly in the film Ziegfeld Follies, where the two, in Astaire's words, beat the hell out of the floor. Like his African-American colleagues, Astaire employs not just his feet but his hands and other parts of his body, as well as inanimate objects, as rhythm instruments. His integration of clapping hands and tapping feet is nowhere more obvious than in his tribute to Bill Robinson and John Bubbles in Swing Time, when he sets up a complicated series of clapping and patting rhythms. In the Broadway Melody of 1940 jukebox dance, Astaire and Powell hit their uplifted feet so fast you can barely see the slaps. In fact, however, any surface that comes in handy can be employed. In Needle in a Haystack, from The Gay Divorcee, Astaire sets up a rhythm with his feet and punctuates it by drumming on the mantel. In Roberta, he casually kicks the wall to help start off, I'll Be Hard to Handle. In No Strings, from Top Hat, he pats the top of a sideboard in his friend's London suite. In the same sequence, he spies a cigarette urn full of sand, which he sprinkles on the floor in the tradition of such African-American sand dancers as Robinson and Sandman Sims, then creates soft, soothing rhythmic sounds to lull his angry beloved to sleep. 2 decades later, he brushes, glides, and taps on sand in a valedictory song in The Belle of New York. The most prominent way Astaire exploited objects that come to hand was his use of a walking stick or cane as a rhythm instrument. During his formative years, canes could be fashionable accessories of able-bodied men on English and American urban streets. Call and response techniques for cane and chorus are used in the songs Top Hat and Puttin' on the Ritz, in which the syncopations of his cane are answered and amplified by a chorus of identically dressed men behind him, or duplications of himself. In You Were Never Lovelier, Astaire is not afraid to accent a dance by sharply tapping Adolphe Menjot's temptingly bald head. He finishes his impromptu audition by deftly launching the cane into a holder at the far end of the room to punctuate his dance with precision. He does the same with an umbrella in the film Funny Face. Such use of these kinds of props, and, as the century went on, many more, was characteristic not only of Astaire's dancing, but of film musical dance as a whole. Astaire draws heavily from African-American dancers' use of their feet in various shuffle and sliding and gliding steps, which had been developed to a high level by African-American dancers long before Michael Jackson's moonwalk became famous. John Bubbles was a virtuoso at this kind of dancing. The dancer shuffles by brushing back and forth on the floor with the balls of his feet and glides by sliding along its surface, almost like a skater on ice. Tap dancers could also drag one foot the side of the shoe brushes the floor, or they could chug forward or back on 2 feet, a kind of abrupt, on-the-ground jump. The dancer looks as though he is preparing to jump by bending the knees, but he actually stays on the floor and travels by dragging both feet back or chugging forward. Bubbles demonstrates his skill in Varsity Show, interspersing his rhythm tapping with all sorts of nuanced brushing, dragging, and sliding steps. In the film version of Cabin in the Sky, he crosses an entire nightclub floor on 1 foot by sliding. Feel the Floor, the life and legacy of jazz choreographer Buddy Bradley. In the era between the two world wars, and after, Buddy Bradley revolutionized dance on 2 continents with African-American jazz movement. In London and New York, he worked with the glamour boys of the stage, Noel Coward, Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hart, George Balanchine, and Sir Frederick Ashton, and gifted dancers from Adele Astaire and Alicia Markova to a young aspirant named Audrey Hepburn to revitalize theatrical dance with syncopation, swing, and sexy sways. Bradley's African-American tap and innovative coupling of dance to lyrics, character, and plot development established the ground for Agnes DeMille, Jerome Robbins, and Bob Fosse. Feel the Floor. The life and legacy of jazz choreographer Buddy Bradley is the first to tell this story. Interviewing dancers, students, actors, actresses, and choreographers who knew Bradley, delving into rare film footage, London archives, studying tap dance, visiting the Black Belt of Alabama, and the mountains of Georgia to reconstruct this transformative but elusive artist, Ms. Footer ushers Buddy Bradley to his rightful place, center stage. In recounting the story of this legendary choreographer, Ms. Footer spotlights the influence of African-American culture on international stages, the flow of transatlantic cultural exchanges, and social developments of the 20th century, as viewed through the unique lens of an African-American artist.
Oh, yes! Great! Got my wings in, yeah. So there we are. We're going to do a show called Shim Sham, all about Buddy Bradley, with members of the Tap Legacy Foundation tapping away like crazy. And the show is called Shim Sham. When my parents, who had given up trying to talk me out of going into show business because they realized I insisted they used to take me to Vaudeville. That was a big mistake they made. So I said, all these dance acts, wow, I got to do that, see? So they figured, all right, if he's going to do that, he better go to the best person in the world to be taught. So Buddy Bradley, he had this great school in London. So, so they take me up and I go up into the studio. I'm 11 years old and I put my little tap shoes on and Mr. B's standing there and I do my little corny little American time step. And I remember standing and saying, okay, I'll take the kid. Yeah, I'll take him. And he took me on as a pupil. And gradually as the years went by, 13 and I'm 14, Buddy started coming out instead of Mr. B. We suddenly became friendly, and I was like the kid brother, and he was like the big brother, you know. And I wouldn't take advantage of him, but I would sort of still treat him with great deference. But he was a very warm person to my life, you know. And then we started talking about other things other than dancing. You know, he got me interested in Richard Wright as a writer, Langston Hughes, and suddenly I'm reading all these books about these great African-American writers, which I had not really been aware of in England at that time especially.
Brings us back to Tab.
Yeah.
Brings us back to Fred Astaire.
Right.
And the story of Buddy, how I was hearing Fred Astaire was getting lessons and
right.
Ruby Key. Tell us
right.
a little bit about that.
Well, that was amazing. That was long before I knew him. Back in America, before that period, the late 20s, I guess, very early 30s, Buddy was known as the ghost choreographer in America. Everybody in the business knew what was going on, but the public didn't know. He was teaching Fred Astaire. He had Adele Astaire, the sister, as his pupil, Ruby Keeler, all these great dancing stars. And on top of that, he would then go to Hollywood, and Busby Berkeley, who was the great choreographer and director of Hollywood musicals.
Twinkle and shine this evening about 8:45.
Most of his choreography was by Buddy, but he never got any credit because of the racial situation. He got paid off very well. He got paid, but he didn't get any credit. Nobody knew it. It was when Busby Berkeley got it. And then back on Broadway, he suddenly is choreographing the Follies shows and Blackbirds and all these big musicals. And but he never got credit. Somebody else, a white director, would get credit. And gradually inside, I guess this was festering inside of Buddy. It was burning. He was making money and all that, but he was getting mad because nobody outside of the profession knew who he was and what talent he might or might not have had. But what drove him to London really was not not just that. He was a bit of a womanizer, you know, and he had all these beautiful girls and working for him, and he had no problem finding women, you know, and he was an attractive man. And what happened is that he made a big mistake. He had a big affair with the girlfriend of the mayor of New York, Mayor Jimmy Walker, see. Now that was a no-no in those days. It wouldn't have been too popular now, I guess, but then it was a big no-no. And when Jimmy Walker found out, he told his buddy, who propped him up as the mayor, a big Irish-American gangster, Oney Madden. And he told Oney Madden, get that cat out of here, you know. And I have proof of all this because Henry Latang, a great choreographer a few years ago here in America, was in Buddy's studio on West 47th Street when Oney Madden and his hoods drove up to the studio, burst in, went into Buddy's office, roughed him up, came out and left. And apparently Buddy figured, I better do something. This is not going to be a good idea. And he had all these offers all this time from C.B. Cochran, a British producer, through an agent that he knew here in America. And the agent was always saying, why don't you take one? He said, no, I'm an American, I'm big in America, you know. And he suddenly thought, hey, discretion is the better part of valor. I think I'd better do that. And this agent called C.B. Cochran, of course, wow, please send him over. And he leaves New York quickly, gets out of Honey Madden's grasp, and he arrives in London. And of course, everything changed. It was a total opposite.
Whenever you talk about tap dancing, you said, who's the world's greatest dancer? We always say, Bill Robinson was the world's greatest tap dancer.
Boy, he got educated feet. Boy, I practice all the time. Here's one I sat up all night trying to do.
Well, Bill Robinson, he really had the tap thing going and he had the joy thing going. And so it was very pleasurable to watch him dance because he appeared to be having such a great time.
Honest to God, he was something else. He was the greatest, and doors have opened for us that would never have opened had he not been there.
Bill Bojangles Robinson was a legend among dancers and a hero to his public. With his ever-present smile and endless energy, he charmed his way into the hearts of millions. But few knew of the obstacles he had to overcome to get to the top, or the lives he touched along the way.
Which created this burning, very fiery thing that was happening.
The Harlem Renaissance brought to New York the most influential jazz musicians in the country. To a large degree, the creators of the form, Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, and Duke Ellington.
You had this period in the 20s and actually really going into the 30s and 40s of the swing period, which was the great heyday of jazz, tap dance, and swing music. You had this really beautiful parallel of the evolution of the dance form and the evolution of the music. It was intoxicating. You know, it just woke everyone up. And it was so rhythmically intoxicated that you couldn't get enough of it.
Show would have been the highest, deepest experience of the Afro-American intelligence. You would have seen a review. You would see singers. You may see a comedian. You may see a whole slew of dancers. Then you would see routines with the bands playing songs with the dancers. Then you'd have a singer come out, an Ella Fitzgerald or Chick Red.
The Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater were popular venues for jazz and for the extravagant floor shows that came with it, hand in glove.
The announcement of the jazz age really came with Shuffle Along in terms of the dancing and the music.
I'm just wild about Harry. Harry's wild about me.
And after that came a number of black musicals on Broadway that really launched the black rhythmic style of jazz tap dancing onto the American stage. From the 20s, you begin to have this training and this incredible development of really great jazz tap dancers.
It also catapulted the career of Bill Bojangles Robinson with Blackbirds.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my proud privilege to present to you America's foremost tap dancer, Bill Bojangles Robinson.
At that time, Bill Robinson really gets, quote, discovered, right? He was born in 1878, but he gets discovered as being the world's best tap dancer. So you had really this influence, Bill Robinson really becoming the major icon of black jazz tap dancing.
He was the first to be a tap star. He was a household name, the first tap dancer to achieve that type of notoriety.
Here we go, on your toe, holla, howdy, ho, Bill Robinson song, let's go to town.
Bill Bojangles' technique was a noteworthy evolution, as the acclaimed jazz critic and musicologist Marshall Stearns explains.
Robinson's contribution to tap dance is exact and specific. He brought it up on its toes, dancing upright and swinging, giving tap a hitherto unknown lightness and presence.
Starring opposite Shirley Temple in 4 films, he is credited with breaking many of the color barriers of his time. The first solo African-American act on Vaudeville, the first actor to appear in a mixed-race Broadway show, and, with Miss Temple, the first interracial dance team in the movies. During this period of abundance, when there were
Bill Robinson was one of the best-loved celebrities in New York, and on the other side of the country, Hollywood was beginning to take notice. It was the 1930s, and motion pictures had replaced vaudeville as the nation's #1 form of entertainment. Bill Robinson made the step up to movies with a starring role in Harlem is Heaven, an all-black film made for black audiences. But he wanted to work in mainstream Hollywood, even though it had little to offer black actors. In his only studio picture, the 1930 RKO musical, Dixiana, he had been relegated to a brief dance number, but he was determined to make it in the big time. And in 1934, when he was offered a role in a major motion picture, he was off to Hollywood. Bill's big chance at a movie career came when Fox Studios chose him as the new dancing partner for their brightest star, a 6-year-old named Shirley Temple.
I like what you like, beans and oyster stew. And I like what you like, on account I love you.
Fast becoming the country's #1 star, Shirley had been busy churning out a succession of cheerful musicals that brought a message of hope to depression-weary audiences. In Shirley's 1935 film, The Little Colonel, Bill was given a supporting role as a butler. He taught the precocious youngster a simplified version of his staircase number, and together, they made Hollywood history.
I want to do that too.
All right. Are you ready?
Yep.
Come on. Say, you get your own quick.
He used to say, Shirley, take small steps, or you know what happens. And she would look at him and just say, yeah, I'd land on my keister. And that was their bonding together.
The dimpled youngster and the elegant old-timer made a magical team. The Little Colonel was a box office smash, and Bill was immediately signed to a 4-picture deal at Fox.
Now you just watch. I went to the market to get some beef, and the beef so tough, and I couldn't get enough. I paid $5 for a great big hog, and the hog so fat, and I couldn't get back.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Come on. Say, you can catch on quick. Look out now. Here's your last one.
What's going on around here?
Bubbles, often described as the father of rhythm tap, which was also known as jazz tap, changed the face of tap dance. When he was 18 years old, he was laughed out of the Hoofers Club, a Harlem gathering place where the foremost tap dancers in the nation openly challenged and competed against each other. This event served to heighten his drive to be acknowledged as a dancer and sent him into intensive practice. At that time, tap dancers stayed on their toes and included a great deal of flash or gymnastic virtuosity in their acts. Bubbles pared down his body movement and added his heels to his tap combinations, creating more syncopated rhythms while exhibiting mastery in the speed and complexity of the steps he improvised. Soon, dancers came to his shows to try to copy his style. Bubbles frustrated them by changing his steps with each performance. Double over the tops, a difficult figure-8 pattern, and cramp rolls, a complex sequence of heel-toe combinations, were among his signature innovations. His style is said to have prepared the way for the rhythms of bebop jazz. Hollywood called upon Bubbles to tutor Fred Astaire, Eleanor Powell, and Ann Miller, among other renowned dancers. In the words of Fjord Nicholas, of the famed Nicholas Brothers dance team, what you used to see Fred Astaire do in the movies, Bubbles had done long before. Bubbles' last appearance as a performer occurred in 1980 at a tribute to George and Ira Gershwin at the Kennedy Center Library. A cerebral hemorrhage took his life at his home in Baldwin Hills, near Los Angeles, California.
The black rhythm vernacular dance tradition that evolved around jazz music.
The most important figure to the specific lineage of rhythm tap is John Bubbles Sublette.
I'll get into my 7-leg boots. I'll get into my bulletproof suits. I'll get out my revolver that shoots. And rat-a-tat-tat. And down they'll go.
John Bubbles was part of the performing duo Buck and Bubbles, who had a successful career in the movies. He was also the first African-American act to appear on television. John Bubbles was described by Fred Astaire as the greatest dancer of his generation. But his lasting contribution is stylistic. It is in this area that he earned his moniker, Father of Rhythm Tap. Instead of concentrating the sound in the toes and balls of the feet, his heel hit the floor and adds a bass note into the musical composition. Then he adds taps in surprising places and notes that aren't typically stressed or even in between them.
John Bubbles brought a certain syncopation that did not exist inside of the form musically. He drops a heel. He drops both a syncopated sound and a bass-rooted element into the music.
When asked about his style, he noted, "I wanted to make it more complicated, so I put more taps in and changed the rhythm. The result? Rhythm tap."
The question is not that he dropped the heels, but where he dropped the heels. He was a person who used the heel and that bass sound to get a more complicated syncopation.
John Bubbles was to tap dance what Louis Armstrong was to jazz. He modernized it.
When he taps, it's just magical, it's musical. Talk about syncopation and just could do anything. A true musician, a true musician. And Buck, of course, played the piano.
John Bubbles, who's really influenced every single tap dancer alive in the century.
Long after a stroke left him partially paralyzed and unable to perform, he remained connected to the dance as a mentor and teacher.
And the great vaudeville team of Buck and Bubbles. Buck was the piano player. Bubbles was the real hoofer. They was tops. They became so popular that they wanted a younger version of a dance team to follow them. So when Chuck and Chuckles first came up from Georgia, Bubbles saw them, he took them under his wing. He molded Chuck into his image as much as possible, like he would do a son. And Chuck idolized Bubbles. Chuck got from Bubbles the technique and the know-how that Bubbles used to execute.
Have you got any castles you want me to build, Bucky boy? Have you got any dragons you want to have killed, Bucky boy? I'll get into my 7-leg boots. I'll get into my bulletproof suits.
Bubbles had such a way of doing the step that they called him the father of rhythm. And that's what we all try to pattern after, that close rhythm. It's like blending music with your dancing.
And the organ manager too. And you'll bring home a dangling too. And you tell all the papers you did it because I love you.
Tried to explain to these people about.
Ah, you do look sharp tonight.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
What is there about me that?
What is there about you what?
Makes me feel well dressed.
Whatever that is, that's what you is.
The same old clothes, shoes, and hat. The same old things rearranged.
Oh.
It's very plain to see just how it happened to be. I put some polish on my scalp piece. I made a shoestring into a tie. I cut the corners off the end of my coat so they wouldn't fly. I got my shirt from a silver lining. I got my cane from an old oak tree. And that is just the reason why the folks all nickname me just because my hair's curly and because my teeth are pearly and just because I always wear a smile and suits to dress up in the latest style. Gee, I'm glad I'm living. Why take troubles all with a smile? Just because my color's shady, a wee bit different maybe, that's why they call me shy. And because your teeth are pearly, just because you always wear a smile, suits to dress up in the latest style.
Was Eleanor Powell. But again, tap history.
If in Broadway Melody of 1938, Powell got a chance to tap dance with George Murphy and Buddy Ebsen, in Honolulu she got her only chance to personally acknowledge the virtuosity of her friend Bill Robinson, albeit in an athletic tap number in a blackface impersonation. Though the sight of it today may be offensive, the routine was intended to be tastefully done, appearing in a segment at a costume ball at which guests were dressed up as their favorite entertainers. Bound by the strict rules of segregated Hollywood, impersonating Robinson was Powell's way of honoring her longtime friend and mentor on the screen, similar to what Fred Astaire, in blackface, tried to do with the Bojangles of Harlem number in the 1936 film Swing Time. Powell had performed with Robinson only at private parties, but Hollywood studios, overly concerned with censorship, morality, and public opinion, would not allow an adult couple of different races to perform together in the 1930s. While the young Shirley Temple could dance innocently with Robinson, Powell was reduced to having to impersonate him.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Dorothy March, in her impersonation of Bill Robinson, the King of Harlem.
all rotated inward.
Let's talk about, Fosse and his, mentors and his or his peers, and we're talking about, Valentine as well. These cats saw a vision. They were inspired, just like most people who don't come from the culture. They come into something, they go, oh, like Elvis ran into the cats and started going to the blues places and being inspired, with these cats and what have you. And they're like, oh, they got an inspiration to do something and to use and they want to take what they saw, right? Which is fine, and they do it, and they become a hit. And what happens is that it becomes so popular that people forget where it started at, and they think it stops with people like Fosse or people like Elvis, and that's the issue always.
Listen, man, I appreciate the movement that Fosse and Luigi and a lot of the other guys created and came up with these ideas that they put together, for their choreography or what have you. But let's be clear about it. That's not authentic jazz dancing. Fosse used to go uptown to Harlem, for his influence. Many of the people did. But Fosse took private lessons and he was inspired by the undulated movements of burlesque dancers in Harlem. He took moves like the boogie woogie and kind of reconfigured it a bit to say what he wanted to say with the movement.
The training I was giving myself was strictly imitative. I didn't have an original step in my repertoire, I could tell you that. Well, I'd play around myself and add bits to routines that other people gave me. But you see, besides
Who did you imitate?
Oh, many people. A lot of black dance acts those days. Slip, Slap, Slide, Step Brothers, the Nicholas Brothers. And then there was a time when you used to buy dance routines from people. You'd go in and give them $250 or $300 and they would sell you a dance that was supposed to be an original dance, but it was a carbon copy of something they sold the person last week.
The same thing with Luigi. Luigi borrowed from, a lot of different techniques of dance.
They begin to believe their hype as if it was them who elevated this particular thing. They're now called, these are the cats who modernize jazz, or they're the modern voice of it. And they never say, it was this guy. It was this guy. I was inspired by this guy. If Rolling Stones never talked about Muddy Waters, no one would ever know that was their inspiration. That's where they got their name from. You know what I mean?
If you really want to understand the